Hello, dear friends. We're sincerely glad to greet you again. Today we're going to talk with the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Greetings.
Igor Mikhailovich, literally a few minutes ago, the conference Global Crisis, Who is Jesus Christ to Us, has ended. A very important, very deep, liberating, and truthful conference. Sometimes the truth is very bitter, to the point of heartbreaking pain. But at the same time, it is precisely the truth and precisely love that every human being needs today. The truth about where we Christians took the wrong turn. After all, today every third person in the world calls themselves a follower of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, who brought into this world the greatest gift, love for God and love for one another. And of course, a question arises, why do we live in a different world, in a world full of divisions, even among Christians, where millions of people today die in wars, die of violence, hunger, and what is equally terrible, they lose the human being within themselves, lose their humanness in the struggle for survival. And of course, all of this contradicts what Jesus Christ dreamed about, because he dreamed of a different world, a world where everyone is a brother to each other, a world where love and mercy reign. Therefore, the facts that have been presented at the conference are certainly very shocking and make us ponder on how many things we people do not see and how much we close our eyes to due to our fear and cowardice. And you know, there comes a deep understanding of why, more often than anything else in the Holy Scripture, Jesus told all of us the phrase, "Fear not." So many thanks to all those people who can courageously face the truth, who are free from fear, in whom love conquers fear. And many thanks to everyone for voicing the truth, because as long as there are those who speak this truth, there are people who can hear it, and there are people who can live according to the truth and make a free choice in favor of love, love for God, love for one's neighbor, and a choice in favor of life.
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank everyone who participated in organizing this conference, for really casting aside fear, for listening to the words of Jesus Christ, as Tatiana said, "Fear not," and for calling things by their proper names. After everything we have heard, a question arises. For 2,000 years, people have known the truth, and for 2,000 years, people have been reaching out for Jesus Christ, yet followed the Antichrist. This is the truth that was necessary. This is the catharsis of all humanity that is taking place right now. We, as the entire humanity, are really falling into the abyss today. And just as an ordinary person relives everything and looks for the reasons for his fall, so do people now try to figure out what was the trigger. The first step in the wrong direction, when all of us, all people on this planet, all of our humanity went the wrong way. Why are we, despite having intelligence, being smart people, and having all the capabilities, up to this day, why are we divided and manipulated? Why do we kill each other, hate each other, and have failed to build a united, honest, and righteous world? That world where everyone would be happy, where life would be valued, where the commandments of the prophets would be fulfilled, and where God's will would reign. After all, it is God's will that was conveyed by the prophets, including Jesus Christ. And the first and the main commandment is, do not kill. Yet we do kill. And why has it so happened that we have reached this dead end? Now, when the climate Cerberus is really gaining strength and momentum, and everyone can already see it, this is an indisputable fact. Excuse me, even the stupidest people who do not want to hear or see anything, who are hiding from reality today, already understand, feel, and see our doom. They see and understand that we cannot confront the climate Cerberus with anything. This certainly scares many people, and many do not want to believe in what is happening. They deny it. However, this disbelief will pass, and it will pass very soon. The Cerberus doesn't give us a way out. The current climate progression leaves us no choice. Already this year, a lot of people are forced to abandon the territories where they live. Tourists run away from their usual vacation spots. Heat oppresses us. Somewhere there are floods and destruction, and we live in this world. Therefore, people start thinking about what went wrong and where. Well, and there is a natural eternal question: who is to blame? This search is noble. It leads to thoughts, and certain thoughts were voiced at this conference and pointed to certain reasons, calling things by their proper names. And it seems to me that this is one of the most important events as of today, when the truth has been voiced. Yes, some people, in particular fanatics, may be slightly offended that this is sort of an attack on Christianity. No, it was done by Christians. Those who really love Jesus Christ, those who respect what He said and strive to fulfill what He said. We have seen just a small number of people who spoke about this, but we haven't seen the thousands of people who prepared this conference and worked very hard to ensure that this truth would be voiced, so that we could hear it. Indeed, great work has been done. Our human work. Okay, we've heard the truth. To what extent will it change our lives? And will it change them? I'll put it as follows. It is unlikely to change our humanity, and it is unlikely to help us resist the Cerberus. Yes, this is the truth. Yes, it is shocking. And by no means is it aimed against believers. On the contrary, the truth purifies, and it shows that Jesus was here. And that essence and verity which He brought here should prevail in our minds, but not people's tricks. And all the more so, not the interests of a small group of people who manipulate it all. In my opinion, it is very important that what was hidden for millennia has been voiced. And here we encounter a kind of conspiracy theory. And I really wouldn't like to look like a conspiracy theorist who is talking about it. However, people themselves have come to this understanding. But Jesus Christ also knew about this, regarding those representatives of this destructive, extremist sect, engaged in international terrorism. Jesus Christ said back then that they are the children of Satan. And this is indeed so, whether we want it or not. Those people have made a lot of effort to ensure that the world is the way it is now, and they keep making efforts and keep implementing their plans. Moreover, we notice a certain cyclicity in their actions as well as their influence. If we look simply, from aside, as a historian or a person who doesn't delve into things and doesn't see what is, openly lying on the table, we might not notice it. After all, history was written by this extremist sect, or rather, by people to its dictation. And it is interesting that this sect always acted exactly from the shadows, stealthily, not going out into the sun, not being the top leaders, but using and appointing its puppet top leaders. If we take the history of religions, then indeed, they inserted their bishops, church hierarchs, and so on. Later on, they replaced them, blaming them for everything, but they themselves remained where they were, in the places of conductors. It's like in an orchestra. We look and see the first chair violinist. We listen to him, but we don't see the one who is conducting him. And when we look at the orchestra, we watch musicians performing some symphony. We see outstanding or leading violinists, but we never look at those who conduct them from the dark and control the entire orchestra. The same is in this case. If we look at all the events that happen in the world, and we look at them one-sidedly, from a political point of view or from an economic point of view, then even in the events of recent decades, we always find the guilty. We always find those who are to blame. Some interests of certain groups of people some political parties, some multinational companies that do business, and they don't need anything but money. However, we don't see the real puppeteers who are behind it all. Yet, this organization is very ancient. And if we look, not at the top leaders who are in sight, but at those who are behind them, and most often, not at those who are behind them, but actually at those who are behind those who are behind the top leaders. That's where we will most often find them, in that very dark corner, an almost invisible one. But this corner is invisible only to us. That's true. In fact, we pay attention to history, like in that very story of Constantine voiced at the conference, right? If we look at Constantine's story, we will see everything one-sidedly. For us as Christians, he's an outstanding man who was actually canonized. He turned Christianity into a state religion and gave it a lot, but we've heard a story about Constantine from another side, a true, real story, what he was guided by, what was happening, and even more so, all the things and manipulations of people that happened afterwards. Yes, we can justify it by saying that he was a man who strove for power. He established a huge empire, but he wanted to create and strengthen it with a single religion so that the state would become more solid. Guys, you know, this is such a stupid idea from the perspective of state government. While that state was an empire, let's step aside a little bit and consider this. There's actually a law. It is really a law on how to retain power. These are the laws which Satan uses to manipulate all of us. And that's the reason why we are all divided. That's the point. And Constantine, despite everything, having, in modern terms, a multi-confessional empire where everyone was divided, which means they would never agree among themselves. While he was the supreme authority and easily manipulated all of them, yet he decided to establish a single religion. That is, to deliberately destroy himself. Well, is this reasonable? It's not. Why? Because if there is a single religion, hence, this state will be doomed. Why? Because of the fight for power and the desire of church hierarchs to dominate. Let's recall history and take a look. After all, such situations always happened when, a ruler, a king, or whoever he was, let's say, a civil ruler, competed with a church hierarch. Most often, those who had an opportunity ascribed to themselves power over both religion and the state. But there was always a fight, you know? It's like today, there is a government, and there is an opposition that can never share power over people in a country, and always seek to push each other out and take away some authority. After all, the fight for power has existed for 6,000 years, and the same things have been happening for 6,000 years, and the experience of ruling countries is enormous. So how could Constantine let such a thing happen? In fact, by that time, experience had already been accumulated, and people already knew this by the example of other religions. They were aware of what it ends with and what kind of confrontation representatives of religion and the king would have. But again, some endow Constantine with outstanding leadership abilities, that he was such a great emperor. He conquered many nations, he judged correctly, and did everything right. But who was actually that Constantine, canonized by the church? An ordinary man who strove for power and was extremely afraid of his competitors. He was a man who worried for his life and his power every moment because he knew how power is attained and how easy it is to take it away. He was afraid of everything and relied on those whom he shouldn't have relied on. because behind his back, there were representatives of this secret organization who suggested to him from many various religions exactly the religion of the Antichrist, since it was extremely convenient. Why was it convenient? Just because it said that all power is from God. There was a clear hierarchy there. This religion was very convenient, manageable, and it was built specifically for the state. Of course, it was attractive for Constantine, so he endowed religious ministers with power. And how did this end for Constantine's empire? If we look carefully, really carefully, if we don't look at musicians, but look at the conductor, we will see how these people who came to power and received a lot of benefits. I won't list everything. You can watch the conference where this is well described. But eventually, it was exactly they who destroyed this empire. They split it into parts, even allegedly having a slight quarrel among themselves. However, they began to control it all, and they keep controlling it to this day. Look how simple everything is. And in reality, this organization, which seemingly based on logic and based on history, simply doesn't exist, but we see it everywhere. You know, it's like an integral component of any object that is in the sun and casts a shadow. And the shadow is anywhere and everywhere. And if we look at how many empires were destroyed, and it was exactly this entity that destroyed them, up to the Soviet Union. Here, people might say, how could the Soviet Union be destroyed by some religious organization? Friends of mine, it's not a religious organization, it's a satanic cult, rather than a religious organization, but they control all religions. Look at what they did to Jesus Christ. How did they react to him? At the conference, the trial of Jesus Christ was described very well. But don't we see similar trials nowadays? We do see them. And they are taking place today. What did they do to the Prophet Muhammad? Exactly the same thing as to Jesus Christ. The only difference is that it was Paul who became the Antichrist. He was the one who killed the first Christians, and he was a disciple, a faithful disciple of the man who ruled and conducted the trials of Jesus Christ, who built and staged everything to crucify him, the Son of God, on the cross. And that man, that very conductor and scriptwriter of the murder of Christ, was a worthy disciple of his teacher. Whereas if we closely look at his teacher and his teacher's teacher, we will understand a whole lot. And if we take a look and trace this chain up to Umar, who ruled Umar, and what eventually happened to Islam, then everything falls into place. Now, let's move closer to our time and look at the Soviet Union. It would seem that this was a perfectly planned operation, let's say, by intelligence services of the United States of America. Let's put it this way for convenience. It is clear that other countries took part in that as well. There was a direct confrontation, but for convenience. I'll put it simply, it was done by the CIA. It was actually their agency. It was an outstanding operation that took place simply without a hitch. They destroyed a huge empire without a single shot. Many will say, the collapse happened due to certain reasons, because of the economy and everything else. But you know, before 1991, 20 years earlier, during the rule of Brezhnev, a certain organization, which had gained a certain freedom, began to diligently create conditions for this to happen. And a question arises here. Who was behind those outstanding, smart people in the CIA who were able to plan and do it all 20 years before that? In this particular period of 20 years, plays a tremendous role in their organization. You know, it is sort of sacral, and we can trace it in many events. I'll give you a simple example. Everyone remembers the year 2001, the tragedy that happened in September in the United States of America. When it happened, it was a landmark event. I told my friends at that time, and they remember it. In 20 years, you will see what will happen to America. People there will face lawlessness and very tough changes in politics. They will face what is impossible now. That cynicism, violation of constitutional rights, and substitutions in very many aspects of their lives. Eventually, the greatness that we see now will gradually fade away. Their cities will start becoming empty, and there will be what we had on our streets at that time. Drug addiction, moral decay, and many other things. This is what our friends in America are facing nowadays. This is what is causing them to already move to completely different states, and many of them leave America. This is what is actually happening in their domestic affairs. We have nothing to do with it, and have no right to judge them. We are not American citizens. But we see what is happening, and this was laid 20 years earlier. In exactly the same way, it was in the Soviet Union 20 years before its collapse, and likewise, a very strange and interesting thing started happening in the Russian Empire under the reign of the Father Tsar, 20 years before the events we all know about. Yes, I realize that many historians will now begin to resent and say that I don't know history, that I haven't delved into it and haven't studied it. Well, my friends, it's impossible to know everything. There are too many different events. Not always, and not everywhere, we are involved, and not always we can see everything. But if we take an unbiased look, I would say, at least read the notes of field surveillance agents, which they submitted to their agencies while observing what was going on in Russian churches, how people's minds were influenced, how people's discontent with the Tsar was promoted, how examples of other countries were set where there was freedom and where people lived freely. And then we see, what do we see? We see the assassination of Stolypin. After his reforms that raised the empire to the heights and made this empire one of the most progressive countries of the world. However, there was one condition. Stolypin kept certain people out of the Duma. And, as a mockery, Stolypin was killed in Ukraine, in Kiev, and buried in Kiev Petrishk Lavra. Those who are in the know will understand who did it and why this is the pinnacle of cynicism. But eventually, those people whose feet weren't supposed to be there had entered the Duma. And it all ended with a war, World War I. But if we look at this World War I and who was behind it, yes, I realize that people will now again say, there were a lot of reasons and so on, the economy and whatnot, along with someone's interests. However, we should look not at those who play musical instruments, but at those who stand behind them, who created those conditions, and how everything happened. Again, let's just take the real protagonists, those who are behind them, the ones we are talking about today. What do we see? We see such a persona as Trotsky. It would seem that Trotsky was an inconspicuous person, yet he played a leading role in building the Soviet Union. Yes, precisely him. Many will again say, what about Lenin? What about others? Dzerzhinsky, and so on. Yes, there were idea-driven people, those who believed and aspired. Yes, there were treaties with Germany and everything else. It was all there. And when the Father Tsar was overthrown, and this group of people got to power, the first thing they did was to ruin the Russian Empire. Its gold reserves disappeared, the army almost collapsed, and the factory stopped. That is, it was economically beneficial for those who allegedly ruined Russia at that time. The name of Rothschild popped up there and of many others. But those were outstanding musicians, whereas the conductors were other people. Ultimately, Trotsky was the one who was supposed to replace Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Although, let's look at how Russia, or rather, the Soviet Union, developed after the revolution. The October Revolution, when the power lying on the ground was literally picked up by a group of communists. What did they do? They promised, of course, communism, and in some way it even resembles the creative society, which is what certain people criticize us for. However, there is one very important difference. Communists didn't give power to people. They introduced such a concept as all power to the Soviets. In other words, nothing changed. Everything remained as it was under the Father Tsar's rule. There was the Duma which governed. Well, instead of the Father Tsar, there was General Secretary, right? And that's all. The first thing they did, pardon me, when they got to power in the Soviet Union was to strengthen themselves. And excuse me, in 1919, when the country was at war, when there was chaos, they began to build new resorts for themselves. Those were the people who got to power. This is for some citizens in a certain country not to criticize their leaders now, when the situation is difficult and problematic, while they sort of allocate money wrongly. And some people say that they embezzle it. But let's look at that group of people. How much money was deposited in foreign accounts, like offshore accounts nowadays, of those who got to power? That very Trotsky, that very Dzerzhinsky, and many others, up to Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Back then they used to say, just in case something happens and we lose, we will have money in our accounts and we will start all over again to save Russia. You know, this is the eternal saving of Russia. But who was behind them? And what did that lead to? And what did we see in the end? Trotsky was kicked out. By whom? By one outstanding individual, or rather, an outstanding disciple of an outstanding teacher. The same teacher that Hitler had. And why? In 1941, it was the beginning of the war, and everything was indicating that Germany was going to attack the Soviet Union. Yet Comrade Stalin didn't believe it. Why? They had the same teacher, and he piously believed that they had an agreement, and he really believed in that. Now, very many people, historians, tell us and give us various examples, evidence, and everything else that Comrade Stalin was absolutely not religious, and he did not believe in mysticism. Who? One of the chief mystics in that group of people didn't believe in mysticism, just like Hitler, who was surrounded by a power group of keepers, precisely those we are talking about today, and precisely those who were traced in the story with Jesus Christ, those who were traced in the story with the best of people, the Prophet Muhammad, those who distorted everything, those who craved power and still crave it to this day, those who destroyed empires and keep destroying them to this day. This is indeed true. And what do we see next? We see how, pardon me, 20 years before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the same thing that had happened 20 years before the collapse of Tsarist Russia began to happen in the churches. Absolutely the same. Do you doubt that? Go ahead and read the reports of KGB intelligence officers, what priests were saying, and how they were influencing people's minds, given that many of them were KGB agents. This is really true. However, the KGB also had to control them. Excuse me, any organization should be controlled by relevant agencies that are on guard of the state, because an organization that involves a lot of people can be potentially dangerous for the state. And that's the right thing to do from the state's perspective. Yet, did anyone react? Both in the first and in the second case. No one did. Because there was a certain influence by this organization, even on the top leaders. And what do we see nowadays? Isn't the situation exactly the same? It would seem it's not. It would seem. However, if we look not at the performers, not at the musicians, but at the conductors, if we look into the shadows, we see the exact same thing. And this is really true. You know, there's an absolute parallel to the point of ridiculousness. Let me give you a simple example, okay? There are plenty of these examples, and we can now pull those rabbits out of a hat in great numbers. Again, I don't want to be accused of conspiracy theories. I've been accused of many things at the instigation of those very conductors. You shouldn't attach conspiracy theories here. It is merely an outside perspective. Maybe this is so, maybe not. Maybe there is such a problem, or maybe it's just a fantasy. You see how careful I'm trying to be so as to avoid confusion, so as not to be blamed, and especially not to set up my friends, you know, so as not to be additionally accused of conspiracy and not to be labeled by representatives of this group again. Let's take basically any country. Well, which one is currently... Let's take Russia. We talked a lot about the Soviet Union and about Russia, so let's look at the events that are taking place. For instance, in relation to the creative society, okay? It would seem that everything is fine and everything is normal. What kind of claims can supervisory agencies have towards the creative society? Let's start with a simple thing. What is the creative society? And what does it talk about? It talks about the truth, about simple elementary things that everyone wants. Can it be accused of anything bad? What? The creative society? First of all, it's an international project where volunteers from all countries participate. It was checked and reviewed, and is still being checked by many lawyers, including, let's say, world-renowned ones. Among other things, our esteemed participants of the project consulted many different agencies in almost all countries. They came to supervisory agencies, presented the project itself, and asked if there were any questions and whether any questions could arise. And of course, the answer was no. They went to those agencies where normal people do not go voluntarily, and even to those that you cannot visit just like that. And yet, our volunteers, what can you say, managed to get in there as well. Nevertheless, very interesting processes are taking place in Russia. Let's say, in a province, some people who had fabricated certain cases, literally fabricated them, sort of, it is legally grounded, came to court and said that the creative society is dangerous. It's an extremist religious organization. A conscientious judge, after familiarizing himself with the case, told the police and those who brought it all to get off. He said, "Don't mess with my head. Otherwise, I will prosecute you for falsifying it all." You see? He's a conscientious judge who doesn't wash in the same bathhouse together with them. But at the same time, after a small period of time, you know, a whole detective story unfolded in another Russian province. It appears, if you look from the outside again, it is important how this organization works. This is really a sect which is actually capable of destroying empires. How cunningly and skillfully it always brings these musicians forward, exposes its flunkies. You know, like in a chess game, when they simply give up their pawns in order to use heavy weapons. And that's where it gets interesting. I will tell you a little bit about the events, how they happened, and we'll explain a little bit. This is such a simple situation, but it shows the gist of things, what happens, what for, and why. So, according to the scenario, how did it all unfold? Everything indeed unfolded according to a scenario. One of our volunteers, who is taking part in the international project where, by the way, I'll clarify it right away. There is a clear principle that every citizen of his or her country is obliged to be solely a patriot of their own country. Note, a patriot of their country. A person must not in any way, either by actions or by thoughts, influence or take any action against the country or against the authorities, regardless of whether he likes or dislikes these authorities. Yes, as a citizen, you can vote later on for a different person in the hope of a change, if you want. But you mustn't engage in any kind of conspiracy, be a traitor to your country, and certainly in no way act and do bad things to the state and to the authorities, solely because your actions, as of a volunteer and a participant of the Creative Society, directed against your own country and your government, may cause severe consequences and make people in this country and your country suffer. And this is one of the pillars of the Creative Society. Friends, you have remembered it, right? That you mustn't harm your country by any actions or seek to overthrow the government or anything else. In other words, the Creative Society is separated from politics, and all the more so, it has nothing to do with religion. Why? Because participants in the Creative Society project include representatives of all religions, the entire globe, and people of all strata, all religions and denominations, as well as a lot of atheists. Why? Because our unification in this project is aimed solely at ensuring that together, as the entire humanity, we would be able to improve the life of every person on this planet, peacefully and legally, solely legally, based on the constitutional rights in every country, and based on international laws that have been checked and verified multiple times, I'll repeat once again, by a huge number of lawyers. And we have also consulted various agencies in Russia as well. Believe me, this is true, and we will keep consulting them again and again. Even in those countries where we haven't reached those agencies yet, we will consult them anyway for us to be able to actually ask people across the world, do you want to live in a world where your life will be the most valuable? Do you want to live in a world where all people will strive to improve everyone's life? These are simple things which Jesus Christ and the Prophet Muhammad spoke about. These ideas proceed from the logic of things and the unity of all humankind. This is an opportunity to become one united civilization, one united humanity, so that in the tough conditions which we are entering, and which everyone already sees, the conditions of climate change, all of us together somehow try to survive and find a solution. So, there are us as the Creative Society and our participant who had leaflets about the Creative Society in her store. And allegedly, based on this entire scene, an old woman came in and took that leaflet. She read it and didn't like something. The grandma is old. She is certainly a church parishioner. And she decided to file a complaint on the alleged religious lawlessness of the Creative Society. The Creative Society commits lawlessness, and it is dangerous for Russia. Just think about it. The Creative Society is dangerous for religion. It's a religious organization, and it poses a threat to Russia. She reported this at 8:11 p.m. sharp. And when our participant was already closing her shop at 8:20 p.m., that is 9 minutes later, she noticed a car parked nearby. A local police officer got out of the car and asked her a question. "What kind of leaflets are you distributing here?" She showed those leaflets. He took it all and questioned her. And then the police chief of that district called her. Can you imagine that? Well, I cannot imagine it, but maybe you, friends, have a much better imagination than I do. And you can imagine that in a Russian district, in a province, they have put things in order to such an extent that there isn't a single crime. Just imagine, the police simply have nothing to do. Indeed, they are already starved for work. They have no wrongdoings at all. And then there's, oh my God, what a hooliganism! A leaflet. Can you imagine the scale of the event? A leaflet about the Creative Society is on the counter of a store, and a grandma reported about it. This is a terrorist attack of a global scale. That's it. This is the overthrow of Putin. This is the collapse of Russia. And this is where the chief of the police came to Russia's defense. He called this poor woman to his office and interrogated her. Do you know what he started with? With Allatra. Wait, stop. The Creative Society is the Creative Society, while Allatra is Allatra. However, he started asking questions about the religious movement, the dreadful, extremist, horrible Allatra in the Creative Society, which, as they say, are essentially the same thing. They manipulate her statements. At first, they questioned her correctly, in brief, and she signed it. But the second time, they completely changed everything. The chief of the police came to her again with this protocol. She wrote that she didn't agree because it was an obvious manipulation, but still. And all this was submitted to court. Do you know for what kind of offense? You will laugh, friends, especially those who watch the conference, and especially those who remember what Jesus Christ was accused of. Illegal missionary activity. For the fact that the Creative Society leaflets are lying in the store. Now, I have a question, my friends. Tell me, is this normal? Or what is going on? I don't know what is in the minds of those people. But further on, it will be even funnier. Illegal missionary activity. And the court accepted it all. Yet, that's not the most interesting thing. Suddenly, a witness appeared. A lawyer asked this witness at the court session, "Wait, who are you in fact?" The man said, "I'm a witness. I came to tell the court about Allatra." So this witness came to the court that had accepted this administrative case, which was handled by the police chief of that district. The court has accepted this case and is considering it on illegal missionary activity. And here the witness came running, being a head of the missionary department of a local church diocese. He came to testify against Allatra. A simple question, what does Allatra have to do with that? Do you know what he said? I think our friends will tell you about it. Anyone who is interested will look and see for themselves. But I'll tell you in brief. Allatra is a sect, a dangerous and scary one. It does bad things. While the head, or the leader, of Allatra is also the leader of the Creative Society. Keep this parallel in mind. The leader of the Creative Society. Hence, it is one and the same thing. Hence, it's a religious organization. At the same time, this head of the church missionary department presented himself as an expert in extremism, and so forth. And at this point, a total farce began. Let me digress a little bit. Without ordering an expert examination, the police chief wrote a letter, for some reason, addressing this very expert who is the head of the expertise center, so to say, in their district. However, completely by chance, the person to whom he sent a letter with a question, his question was simple. Is Allatra a religious organization? And, in fact, is the Creative Society dangerous. And is it a religious organization? And that woman responded to him in a letter that, so far, there is no court decision that Allatra is a religious organization. But based on all the information, the Creative Society can be a religious organization and, under certain conditions, can become dangerous for the Russian Federation. I emphasize, this is not an expert examination, not an expert opinion, but just a written response to an inquiry. Not even an inquiry, but an answer to a question from her close acquaintance, where she says, maybe or maybe not, possibly yes, or possibly not. It's just a reply in a letter, regarding which the judge said that it is also taken into account as an expert opinion. Well, isn't this funny? You see, it is such a serious, in-depth expert analysis, and the court accepted it. But at the same time, the court refused to accept from the lawyer an expert opinion regarding Allatra, which had been issued in Moscow. Do you know why? Because the expert examination was ordered by Allatra IPM in a respectable expertise center that carries out examinations for state agencies, serious agencies, and they accept its opinion at the government level. While in this case, the magistrate judge says, no, I won't accept this document. Again, a candidate of sciences signed it all. But who is he? Where is he from? Can he be an expert in religions? Thus, this judge is critical about a scientific and legal expert opinion, a real expertise, but at the same time, he takes into account a simple response to a request, a banal letter. One person wrote a letter to another, who replied to him, and this is considered superior to official expertise. There, in a province, a judge knows better who is an expert in what. But the so-called expert to whom the police chief wrote a letter, completely coincidentally, you know, it happens in life. You throw two dice, and the same numbers fall out. And here, by pure coincidence, she turned out to be a co-author of several books by this very head of the missionary department of the local church diocese. Then there appears another character, the deputy head of the anti-extremism department. You know, by pure coincidence, he happens to be a student of this head of the missionary department, of this chief missionary in their district. It is also coincidental. And the funniest thing is, it made me laugh, which is actually why I recalled it. One of the proofs, when this missionary came running, he brought a printout of a video that had just come out, People in Power, on Allatra TV. So he actually watches our videos. Well, if he watches them, hello, fellow. God help you. This is to him personally. So he brought a printout of this video, and I understood what offended him. He was offended by the fact that in this video, when I talked to Tatiana, I told her that there was a certain chaos and lawlessness going on, because in one bathhouse, the head of the district police, the head of the prosecutor's office, the judge, and the head of the administration steamed in the same bathhouse with the same chicks and glasses of beer. He was offended by this, so he came running and brought the printout to the court as evidence, which the court accepted. Do you know why he was offended? Because I didn't mention their metropolitan bishop, that it turns out that he steams with them in the same bathhouse. That's why he has such an influence on them, and that he forces the state agencies to violate the rights guaranteed by the Constitution of the Russian Federation, just to trample on them, to fabricate cases on the spot and, what's more, to accept it all in court. But thank God, as I said, not everywhere, only where this organization has power over local law enforcement agencies and judges. Well, I won't describe the entire farce. It was quite a performance. By the way, he said I had a mark on me, and he called you, my Allatra friends, mentally ill people, saying that in Allatra, everyone is mentally abnormal, unbalanced, and there are actually no sane people in Allatra. If all people were healthy there, everyone would be in their diocese. We would all go to their province and bring money to their metropolitan bishop who, By the way, in hard times, when there was the pandemic, when churches were empty and priests had nothing to pay tribute to up there to the diocese, and it was decided to reduce the tax charged from the clergy. Up there, they have their own tax. It is worse than in the state. Apparently, receiving little money up there, they began to change, and they changed the metropolitan bishop in that province. They appointed another one, and he came and immediately said, "Everyone will pay the tax in full." It's funny, isn't it? It just shows why they fight so much, what is the most important to them, and what is at the forefront. But it's their business. Nobody interferes there, in fact. But the funny thing is that they began to accuse us, and this very main accuser and instigator. Yet there is a suspicion, which is not supported by anything, other than our assumptions and reflections that this whole scenario was developed by this very head of the missionary department. He knew everyone, everywhere. He developed everything. He directly influenced the trial and was present at it. And what is no less important, the decision of the court was based on the opinion, I emphasize, only on the opinion of this head of the missionary department of the diocese. And the deputy head, that is, his friend, the deputy head of the anti-extremism department, his disciple and friend, well, these are interested parties. But the judge, who is also an interested party, and who has no moral right to be called a judge, to put on a robe, and to make any kind of decisions in court, nevertheless has issued a decision because he has such power. This is really a violation of the Constitution and all conceivable laws. And all this was necessary just to include a line in the court's decision that the Creative Society is a religious movement. Think about it. The Creative Society is a religious movement. If we draw this parallel with the past, it is somehow so vile and disgusting. Well, that's not the point. What else did he accuse Allat of? Not only are we all schizophrenics, I have a mark on me, and I am a leader in Allat and in the Creative Society project, which means that the Creative Society is also a religious movement because of me, friends. Well, is it how it turns out? But here's a simple question. Why is he so lazy and hasn't studied the Creative Society project? After all, in the Creative Society, there is no leader and there cannot be. Yes, there are responsible people in the coordination centers, but I'm not one of them. I am one of the volunteers, a simple, ordinary person. Whereas leaders in the Creative Society are those who are now communicating with other people, with those who don't know about the Creative Society, and telling them about the advantages that people will get and about the benefits of the Creative Society that we can really implement together for each and everyone, including those fellows. You see, we even take care of them and their children, while they only care about something different, the interests of those who are behind them, those shadows that influence their consciousness. Again, why is Allat so frightening? And this fellow clearly says that we gather mentally unstable people in Allat in order to take their property, their money, and to exploit them, also sexually. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? In other words, we have gathered you all together and are simply exploiting you, and we have taken your money and your property, and we are also exploiting you sexually. And who is saying that? A representative of those who have been raping children for centuries and doing hell knows what. But we're not like that. Although they put a label on us, but it is their right, their vision, and there are a lot of questions here. Also to them. But people see the truth. People see what Allat is and everything else. But why did they do that? Just to create a precedent. And what is it? Let's think about it. In the decision, which violates everything that can be violated, I've already talked about it, including the fact that this magistrate judge of the Russian Federation, who, pardon my expression, has simply shit on the Constitution of the Russian Federation, who has caused suffering to innocent people, has issued a decision that 25,000 rubles should be paid by the participant of the Creative Society project for her illegal missionary activity. But that's not all. It simply says that the court has ascertained that the Creative Society is a religious movement. Look how simple it is, isn't it? Question, what for? Why did they need this wording? I will explain to those who do not guess and do not understand. In order to start using everywhere and anywhere this wording which has been established by the court, that, the Creative Society is a religious movement. What do they mean by religious movement? I don't understand this. To be honest, this already goes beyond my marked consciousness, as they called it. But the point is different. This wording exists. What will happen next? It is clear that the lawyers have filed an appeal. It is clear that this will now be made public, and there will be proceedings because even you have to understand the situation. We will not voice it, but we are interested in ensuring that the constitutional rights of citizens around the world, wherever they live, are respected. That's the way it should be. People shouldn't suffer because of somebody's interests when they do not deserve it. And this is right. We think so. But where do they get such hatred for anything that gets in their way? And how can the Creative Society get in the way? Friends, let me give you a simple answer. As of today, no state is or can be threatened by the Creative Society. Although they claimed, again, this department head claimed, just look how popular he is today. That fellow has become our number one, the first fiddle in their priestly orchestra. But what is the point? He said that we are trying to build a state within a state, and we are threatening the integrity of the Russian state. Do you remember what I said? 20 years. And when did it start? That's a good question. You know, I wasn't lazy and asked my friends, who is he? We had a quick look at the information about him in open sources. Now pay attention to why I'm talking about him. It's actually a trivial case. It will be handled by lawyers, and it would have been as quiet as always, like many other cases that arise. I'll digress, you know. It's just boiling over. I'll come back to it now. At a time when, on the other side of the globe, in police stations, policemen are holding a presentation about the Creative Society for their citizens. At a time when, in other completely different countries, policemen are telling people about the Creative Society. At a time when in that very country, in the Russian Federation, a policeman supports the Creative Society, helps and explains how to inform people about the Creative Society properly and where, so that no administrative violations occur. There appear some places where such laws are adopted. You see, while it should already be considered a law if there is a precedent and a court decision, right? Yet, what is it actually for? Why do they attach such a stigma to the project? It's not even an organization, I emphasize, it's a project. So why do they need to stigmatize it? Why do they need to bring, well, some people will say, you know, everything is actually clear. They want to bring this case into their religious sphere, where they dominate, where they can label the project as extremism or whatnot, and eventually trample on it the same way they have trampled on many other different religious organizations that are allowed by the Constitution. Well, they can do that easily. And why are they so eager to dominate? Why are they so eager to attain total power in the spiritual field in this country? The answer is simple. And once again, we have this hero of ours, a violinist. He's a historian, a writer, and a very intelligent man. He has organized and led this special operation to discredit the Creative Society very well. He should be given credit. He knows his job. He has involved and exposed everyone he could. But who is he? Let's take a look. Is the organization he represents dangerous? After all, it was he who, influencing the minds of his parishioners, openly declared before the Duma elections, I'll say it again, for the flock of this church, he represents the Word of God, the church itself, because he is the head of the missionary department of that diocese, and he manipulates people's opinions very skillfully, correctly, legally, openly, and subtly, without mentioning names, but pointing out and explaining so that everyone understands who is mentioned. He says, people, be careful. Representatives of these sects go to the elections for our state Duma. These terrible extremist sects which are aimed at destroying the state because they collect the data of all our citizens. They write memos to the special services of America, and they want to be elected to our state Duma. And he calls on the people to be careful and cautious and to vote only for those who have been checked. It becomes immediately clear for whom? For those who support their diocese. In other words, vote for those whom we have blessed and who will work for us, because we have put them in power. Well, that was just my addition. Maybe this is not exactly what the person meant. Or maybe he was just worried about the country in general, when he violated constitutional rights, the right to choose, and the prohibition of influencing voters' opinions. You see how simple everything is. This is his direct statement. Well, I may have departed slightly from his specific words. I apologize. As people have said, so I repeat, I had no time to deal with this nonsense. I asked, and my friends helped me gather information. And what I liked most of all was that as a citizen, as the head of the missionary department of a diocese of the Russian Orthodox Church, he has the right to express his opinion. On more than one occasion, he expressed his direct dissatisfaction with the president. First, reluctantly and gently, and then explicitly, exactly as other clergymen of the same church in the same country were saying 20 years before the fall of the Tsar, according to the notes of surveillance agents. And where did that lead? Is it worth thinking about? No. This is not to set him up. Some people would think that I'm trying to do some, bad things against this man, that I am setting him up. By no means. I have no interest in that. The man is living his life, and let him live it the way he wants. It is his desire and aspiration to live the way he lives. But does this person have an influence, and who is behind him? After all, we have to understand that there is a very rigid hierarchy in this organization. Without the blessing of the metropolitan bishop, he wouldn't even open his mouth. But metropolitan bishops come and go, while he stays and continues doing what he has been doing. In other words, this indicates directly that they insert their deputies into the State Duma, that is, into the supreme authority. They do it skillfully and sort of casually, but they support and promote them. An organization that is separated from the government. I'll say it again. An organization separated from the government by the Constitution promotes its people to the state bodies at the highest level. And this organization influences people's opinion that their president is bad. What's the point of that? Do they want their president to be overthrown? Just like half the world dream. One can understand them. One can understand why they want to overthrow Putin, why they want to destroy Russia, a country full of resources, that is well armed, dangerous, and so forth. But I have a question, friends. It applies to the other part, the part that wants the collapse of Russia. Tell me, what will you achieve by destroying Russia? By overthrowing Putin? Do you think there will be peace? After all, in the country of those who dream about this, there are also shadows observed. Are you sure that conditions are not being created now for the same thing to happen in your countries? Look attentively, people, around the world. Look at what is happening. What does it smell like? You know, every dish has its smell. Won't it end with... Again, this is just a conjecture. That may not be the case. I'm discoursing. I have such a right as a citizen of this world. Won't it all end in a single world government? Do you think it won't? There are countries like China, for example, where religion is in the background. They are more of an atheist country, and so forth. People are more atheistic. Practical things are much more important to them. You are wrong, friends. Despite the entire structure controlling the population of China, despite their agencies, they are doing a wonderful job. We observed, already for a long time, the work of this organization there. Look for yourselves, and you will see a lot of things that are happening, and seemingly should not be happening in China. But on the other hand, it seems natural that they are happening. Everything can be justified, depending on which way you look at it. In the same way, we can consider an orchestra to be well played. They have the notes, they play. But without a conductor, they will play according to the notes. Yet, each of them will play their own notes. Out of sync, and making mistakes, they start playing on time, end it wrong, and everything they play will turn into chaos. While in this case, a hand is clearly traced. A strong hand of the conductor. Whoever wants to will see and find it. But let's go back to Russia again. So we see obvious extremism and manifestation of, I would say, again, not in this man. No, he is too shallow and too intellectually developed to conduct such matters. He is just one of the musicians and far from being the first fiddle. But we can see that someone has already valued the Russian president at 25,000 rubles. That's the price of reality. Doesn't this offend you, friends? You know, it makes me want to ask, how long will this continue? Here's the answer. Whether such a thing exists or not, but in fact it does. This is funny. Ridiculous. I feel disheartened for honest people, for those true volunteers who strive to improve everyone's life. However, there are those who strive to be in the shadows. Like cockroaches, they grab a piece, run away, and quietly eat it in the shadows, so that no one hinders them. Why? There are many various organizations in the world. However, why is this particular organization, this radical extremist sect, that is engaged in international terrorism, afraid of the creative society the most? Well, it has just started being afraid of it, but it has been fighting Allatra since day one. Even earlier, much earlier, before Allatra even appeared, that sect was already fighting it. And I think this is worth talking about. Okay. The situation is clear. We will leave it for your consideration. To those who should solve these kinds of problems in your country, if you like it, so be it. Each person is free to make decisions regarding his or her own country. We, including myself as a volunteer of the Creative Society Project, have no right to interfere in another country, and all the more so, to oppose or commit any actions against the country I'm a citizen of, or to commit any actions against the authorities. Do you see how compliant we are? We have specially introduced this approach and comply with it in order to be convenient for everyone, but still we evoke fear in some people. Now, Allatra. The time has come to talk about it too. What makes it so scary? Let's just take a look. What is Allatra? To put it simply, Allat Ra. means the power of God, if we translate it into modern language. But why is there so much hatred? And why do we say that there is a radical extremist sect engaged in international terrorism? There are plenty of examples, but in this case, we're going to talk about Allatra. Let's take a look. As a matter of fact, Allatra itself is not and cannot be a religion. Allatra as such is nothing but an encyclopedia. Nothing more and nothing less. It's a foundation on which basically all religions are built. It is what all the prophets spoke about. Yes, some of them spoke in their own language, others in another language, but essentially, they spoke about what God commanded to them, about the truth and about the essence. And this truth and essence, the very quintessence of all the prophets of what the Lord God Himself sent here through His messengers, is nothing but Allatra. So here's a question. Why is it being fought against so actively? And why does the fight against it mean international extremism? Or even worse, radical extremism? And even much worse, really, international terrorism? And do we have the right to say so? I will speak as a volunteer of Allatra. Yes, we have the right to say so. And here's a simple example. I'll tell you a little bit of history. When Allatra appeared, it was the year 2013. In Ukraine, the well-known events were already starting. The Maidan, there was an aspiration for change in the country. Everyone hoped for the better. And in 2014, right when the president had fled, hostilities broke out inside the country against the east of Ukraine. Everyone was sort of busy, but not everyone. An active resistance began, and mass media started talking about Allatra in an extremely negative light. They were saying, particularly in Ukraine, that Allatra is a pro-Putin organization. It is the Russian world. It's a pro-Russian sect aimed at destabilizing Ukraine. Many participants of Allatra, including myself, were included in the Miratvorets database. And a serious counteraction to Allatra began, at least publicly. There were requests for the security service of Ukraine and other agencies to investigate where the money came from. It was claimed that the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation paid and financed all the expenses of Allatra. But the most interesting thing is not this. The most interesting thing is that almost exactly the same thing started in the Russian Federation. I'll jump a little bit ahead, and then I'll come back to my narration so as to make it clear. Imagine, quite recently in recent years, there has been a direct confrontation between two antagonists, Russia and Ukraine. There are real hostilities going on. No one calls it a war, but for us, citizens, it's a real war. Our homes have been destroyed. Our relatives and friends have been killed. This is war, a real war. There is no political cooperation of any kind between these two countries. But at the same time, right at the time of this clash and confrontation between the West and the East, in the territory of our country, Ukraine, Ukrainian mainstream channels show a lot of negative stories about Allatra, according to a certain scenario. And exactly the same stories are shown on mainstream channels in the Russian Federation. You know, in the stories shown on Ukrainian channels, it was said that this is a pro-Russian organization, that in Allatra we have elevated Putin to the rank of God, that all of us pray to him, and exactly the same thing, only without Putin, and saying that it's a pro-Russian organization with a replacement, that it's a project of the Security Service of Ukraine. is shown on Russian mainstream channels, where they say that allegedly, as a cover-up, the security service of Ukraine uses such techniques as including people in the Miratvorets database so that the audience in Russia would think positively about them. You know, such a mindset, while in reality it's an SSU project. Others started to go even further, whatever. However, stories are the same, characters are the same, and everything is arranged in exactly the same way. They take a little information about Allatra and a lot of negative material about totally different organizations that have nothing to do with the Allatra project, about the White Brotherhood and all sorts of other organizations that have discredited themselves in our contemporary history, and it is all mixed with Allatra. In other words, there is an obvious manipulation. This is indeed true. We were also called names and insulted in every possible way. And as one of the epithets, which was supposed to scare people away from us and turn them away, they called us a sect, the Allatra sect. You know, it's funny to me, the word sect doesn't scare me at all. Why? A sect means a sequestrum that has separated from something whole. But what whole could Allatra separate from? Has Allatra actually separated from God? Allatra is the foundation of all religions. It is what a prophet spoke about. Every prophet who brought a message from God here. How could the truth separate itself from the truth? In no way. Hence, this epithet is not applicable. But it is applicable, let's say, to a fragment, a sequestrum of humanity. So, who among us is not a sectarian? Tell me. Are we one united humanity as of today? No. Do we, all of humanity, represent one united civilization? We don't. We are divided. We are all sectarians. There are those who bring the light here. They are like candles in absolute darkness. When there is one candle, it cannot dissipate all the darkness of this world with its light. But when there are millions of such candles, and especially billions, the darkness recedes. However, there are those who fear the light like cockroaches. When you turn on the light, all of them scatter under the baseboard, scavenging all sorts of crumbs that have fallen from a table. In the same way, some people are afraid of the light. As soon as they notice it, they try to extinguish it. And it is worth thinking about who these people are, who act against the light purposely and deliberately. Do they have anything to do with the one whom we call God? They have their own God and their own objectives, and those objectives are exactly opposite to our desires. The desires of ordinary people, of us, the billions. Those few individuals seek to do anything to dominate, while we simply want to live. And this is something to think about, isn't it, friends? So, I'm just curious, in your opinion, what kind of organization is it if it possesses enough power and authority and can dictate to journalists and mainstream channels in 2 countries that are antagonistic today? Nevertheless, identical footage is promoted and, excuse me, in the same way, journalists are urged to fabricate extremely negative stories and publish them nationwide in different countries that are in direct opposition to each other. And this organization has power all over the world as well. Tell me, what kind of an organization is it? This is worth pondering, isn't it? What kind of a persistent and mighty force is that? At the same time, the same journalists whom they sent to us and to our people, the journalists who filmed, altered, and distorted everything that was said to them, sometimes without even listening. They only needed to film a little bit and then alter, distort, and make it all look extremely negative. The same journalist said, "Sorry, this material about you was ordered by priests." That's funny. But they said this material about you was ordered by priests, so treat it as negative publicity. Don't take offense at us. But why would we take offense at those who live in the same world where we live, where money has replaced God, where one's personal well-being and work have replaced the concept of honor and even humaneness? Such is the world. So, I have told you what is happening, literally, in our days. All this has been happening quite recently. Moreover, similar stories emerge in Europe and even in America. Mainstream media are using identical narratives. So, what is so scary about Allatra? And to whom is it scary? In fact, when the post-Maidan events began, when the war was going on, when a wave of the national idea of opposition to Russia and everything Russian started, it's unpleasant to say and to recall it, friends. At that time, our participants, the Allatra participants, who have no relation either to the government or to state affairs or to politics at all, even to religions. Why? Because Allatra is actually perceived very well by those who believe in God, by those very clergymen of both Christianity and Islam, and it only strengthens them in their faith and love for God. It doesn't drive them out of their temples and their religions, but it gives them understanding and makes their search easier, like a search engine in our gadgets. In the same way, Allatra helps people find those original grains brought here by the prophets. However, a serious opposition towards Allatra does arise. Radically predisposed young men with nationalist ideas break into our participants' homes at night, at a time when some of them had children there, including infants and elderly people, in their homes, and threatening them and their families with murder and execution. Those guys begin to teach them to love their motherland and teach them how they should live. This is unpleasant. This was going on in Western Ukraine and all over the country. The same kind of fellows broke in during our participants' international calls with participants from other countries. There are video records of that. We have it all. It was very unpleasant, painful, and scary for people. I cannot tell you what they experienced. They can tell you about it themselves if anyone is interested. But if you are curious, I can tell you what I experienced and how it affected my life in particular. I'm used to it. To be honest, I have been persecuted by that organization since my early youth. And it so happened that even in my early youth, I looked death in the eye more often than I looked at my own reflection in the mirror. Well, big talk, but it's true, friends. I've been killed more times than you have fingers. And the question is, who did it and why? And for what? For the truth. In fact, for the truth and for the light, which the darkness cannot stand. Allatra really could not and cannot threaten any religion, any country, or any political party. It can threaten no one except one organization in this world. Neither can the Creative Society. Both Allatra and the Creative Society can only be a stumbling block for this radical extremist sect engaged in international terrorism. I hope you understand now why I call it international terrorism. We have just heard that exactly the same thing is going on in the Russian Federation in relation to the Creative Society, which is being accused of being connected with Allatra. Like a hindrance. Exactly the same thing was happening in Ukraine. Similar things happened in other countries as well. And in just the same way, people suffered from those who violated constitutional rights and international rights of citizens. But why did they do that? And again, why is it so frightening for the representatives of the most ancient sect? The answer lies in history and in their striving for dominance. They don't like the truth. They don't like it when the verity is revealed, the one that they've been hiding for centuries. Indeed, they've been controlling those processes which destroyed libraries, artifacts, and the entire history. They destroyed the hadiths, they destroyed the first Christians and all sorts of records that could become a part of the true Bible, the teaching given by Jesus Christ. The truth is bitter for this radical, extremist sect because it's like a light that exposes all the darkness, and it can change those events which these keepers want to commit. Back in those years, there were unfortunately tough moments in the lives of our people. But thank God, the people stood their ground. However, the current times are no easier with regard to Allatra. As we can see, it continues to be a hindrance for certain fellows, those fellows who ruin empires. Their main goal is destruction, and they are the ones who seek to accuse Allatra of extremism. These are the people. We again return to the Russian Federation, who arranged a trial like the one we've just told you about, in violation of all the laws, and again, they used those who wash in the same bathhouse with them, where one hand washes the other. And not only the hand, where they manage and control everything. For example, regarding Sensei of Shambhala, Book 4, they adopted a resolution that this book contains signs of extremism. There are literally a few phrases that comply with encyclopedias that were written in their own country. How can such a thing happen? Just like that. They just wanted it this way, and they have influence on authorities, on judges, and it is extremely difficult to prove anything. Yes, people filed a lawsuit. They continue the litigation, and maybe they will file more lawsuits. But nevertheless, the ban was passed. The ban was issued on this book, and the stigma of extremism has spread around the world because of several phrases. And many people already start saying in mass media that Allatra is an extremist organization. Extremism means division. It is what those fellows are engaged in, and it is what law enforcement agencies do, that separate people and create tension. Like in a compressed spring, they create tension among people by their actions, violating their rights and the law, and they press so much that someday the spring will straighten. Those who are behind these law enforcement agencies hope that when this spring in the form of a human mass begins to straighten, they will be able to adjust its movement in the direction they need. But they don't like Allatra. And here's a simple example. To prove that this is terrorism, I've mentioned those people who suffered, really suffered. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Just a little bit. And I will say why I've told you this story. Let's take a few months of the year 2015, from May to July. I'll begin step by step. I took one and the same route. I went to work. From work, I went to the coordination center, and then to my friends. Basically, the route was simple, and it was always repeated, either there or there. One day I noticed, when I was driving to work, there are such cars which you notice sometimes, although they try to hide in some way and they change. For some reason, I spotted two cars. I don't know why, although the plates on those cars changed. I noticed two cars that I often came across, a gray sedan Skoda, Octavia and a black SUV Prado. The plate numbers were different, but the cars were the same. And somehow, they appeared coincidentally, as if controlling the passage. Naturally, I started driving slower and took a wider radius when turning, realizing that someone had an interest in me. I'll tell you right away, it was far from being the first situation like that, and it's just an episode, even in relation to Allat. And in relation to my life, this is a vivid example of the fact that after yet another publication that had been released in April 2015, which influenced people's opinions, I noticed frequently encountered cars. And so, when I was leaving my friends, there is quite a narrow alley, just enough for 2 cars to pass, with closely spaced fences and a narrow sidewalk. I noticed that when I literally turned towards my house, there was that Skoda Octavia parked. While a little farther on the curb of the opposite side of the alley, there was a truck at a sufficient distance. I could see that the truck was simply parked there, but when I looked to the left at the crossroads, I saw a black SUV at a distance. I realized that the time had come. I was driving a car that my friends insisted on, so that the car had an excess power in the engine. And there was such an interesting and magic button called Sport. To be honest, that day I pressed it for the first time. I pressed that Sport button, and as usual, with a sufficiently wide turning radius, I slowly drove out and just drove. But when I caught up with that Skoda, it immediately started moving. You know, sometimes you drive up to a car, the driver doesn't notice you and totally accidentally starts moving as well. But at that moment, the truck accelerated in my direction. In the rearview mirror, I saw the black SUV Prado moving after me. That was a classic box. And if it wasn't for that Sport button and the care of my friends, which I thank you for, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. Literally, that 1 second that this car gave me with its power and this magic button, which, by the way, I practically never used afterwards. And I managed to drive out, literally, before that truck and that Skoda, which was pushing me to the left side of the road. Yes, maybe it was a coincidence. Such things happen in life. We get into such bad situations on the road. It happens, of course. We can surely think that it was a classic box, an accident, a road traffic accident, that someone intended to do that. It may be attributed to this hidden, secret, and powerful sect. Some people will say, if they wanted to, they would have killed you. Of course, definitely. This is what would happen. 2 weeks later, when I was at the parking lot near the epicenter store, while my wife was shopping, I decided to load part of the goods into the car. Those men who accompanied their spouses to large stores understand what this is. Sometimes you want to break away to smoke, to get some air, and simply distract yourself from all those petty purchases. After all, that's not a fishing shop where you can walk around all day long, right, friends? So that's what I decided to do. And the excuse was decent. The goods were already purchased. I said, I'll pay, go put them in the car and come back. It so happened that the parking space next to my car was free, so I put the goods into the trunk and was just standing near the car and smoking. Then I saw 2 people in camouflage uniforms walking. At that time, you understand for yourselves, there were hostilities in the country, and people in such uniforms walked around everywhere. Those 2 men were walking in looking at me. Naturally, who else were they supposed to look at? There were just cars around, no people, and I was alone. The situation was sort of normal and natural. But if any of you has seen the eyes of a person who wants to kill you, and he is approaching you, doubts disappear. One of those men went straight towards me, while the other one started going around, because there was an empty space. I realized, these are my conjectures and reflections, that he decided to go beyond the periphery of my perception. I had a man bag in my hands with keys, documents, and all sorts of small items in it, while in the hand of the fellow who was approaching me, A knife blade glittered, which he was hiding behind his hip. His automatic movement, when he took out the knife, indicated that he wasn't holding it for the first time. Plus, I saw his gaze and everything else. But I had the man bag and at least some chance. I really had a chance. In order not to let his accomplice beyond the periphery of my perception, there was nothing left for me to do but take a step. This was a normal situation and a normal decision of mine. As a rule, such a move stops people who approach you, and those fellows also stopped. I looked into his eyes and asked him, "Do you really want to do this?" We were looking eye to eye, literally, for a few seconds. His accomplice was standing still, looking at us. The first man changed his gaze and said, "No." I told him, "Thank you." He turned around and walked away, and his accomplice followed him. Quite possibly, the man with a knife just wanted to come up and ask me if I had a sharpener. You never know, the man's knife could be blunt, or he wanted to ask me for a cigarette. So he perceived my words, "Do you really want to do this?" as, "Do you really want to poison your body with nicotine?" He thought, smoking is harmful. And looking at me, he would say, "No, I don't want to look as old and bad as you do." So he said no, turned around and walked away. Can such a thing happen? Yes, it can. However, just in case, maybe I did the wrong thing. But I involved my friends, who had at least some opportunity from those very law enforcement agencies to make inquiries about a video record of that moment, since there were a lot of surveillance cameras in the parking lot. And you know, even such situations happen. Right at that time, IT specialists were adjusting the cameras and nothing was recorded. I don't want to say anything, such things do happen. It's a coincidence. Sometimes there can simply be such coincidences which we begin to exaggerate and somehow apply to ourselves. You know, there are people who win money in casinos. After all, it is said that only a casino can win in a casino. But there are examples of lucky people. Perhaps that was some kind of coincidence too. Maybe. Almost a month passed. Yes, about that, or maybe a bit more. It was the second half of June. I finished my work. I worked in the territory of Kiev-Pechersk-Lavra. I had my own clinic there. My friends remember. No, and can imagine what it is like at 6 p.m. in Kiev-Pechersk-Lavra on a sunny day. I would park my car right outside the gate. In order for me not to maneuver when there are many people. When I came in the morning, there were a few people going to work, but in the evening, it was already crowded. So I always parked my car in such a way that the front of my car would face the boom gate in the road, so that I wouldn't have to maneuver, you know, to avoid endangering people. Also, it's not always convenient. So every morning, I turned the car around, got out of it, then came back after work, got into the car and drove off. But this time, on my way out, I noticed a white Volkswagen parked next to my car. What attracted my attention was that among the tourists, the multitude of people, there were 5 people in camouflage. And, you know, as they say, carbon copies. Bearded, young, athletic, in camouflage and sunglasses. Sort of a classic look. Well, I'd like to mention that at that time, we had a lot of people in camouflage uniforms, and a beard became an integral part of the ATO, anti-terrorist operation participants. Even those who didn't participate and had no relation to the ATO began to imitate them and also had beards. There was absolutely nothing surprising. So I just came up to my car to get inside while on each side there were 2 of these men in camouflage. I noticed that the 6th man was the driver. So, it turned out to be an interesting positioning. For those who are interested, I was standing near the door of my car. 2 men were on one side, 2 on the other, yet there was nowhere to run on that side anyway. The situation itself and their positioning was so classic that given my age and excess weight, any of my actions would be futile. especially since two of them, just by pulling back their jackets a little, demonstrated their firearms. But as I realized, the one who was their commander stood in front of me, behind my car, and suggested that I just put my bag with the keys on the car and follow these guys into their car, into this white Volkswagen. He said to me, he just looked at me and said, "You don't want innocent people to get hurt here, do you?" Naturally, I didn't want that, especially since it was all pointless anyway. I thought, if people offer a ride, why not talk? They are polite. Or rather, not even you, but he said, "Will you please join us, sir?" I mean, he addressed me, sir, and afterwards he addressed me exclusively, sir. He was a courteous, cultured man. Meanwhile, they opened the door, two of them got in first, and I followed them. It was a correct positioning. They were sitting a little farther away than I was sitting. The other two were in their seats, and the commander, as I called him to myself, that is, the leader of this group, because basically he was the only one who spoke. The others were silent. And he also was sitting correctly, that is, I had no chance at all. You know, when a person gets into such situations, no matter how many times you've been in them, consciousness always activates. And it is very interesting to watch your consciousness as it searches for various suitable options. When something happens suddenly, you act on reflex, but when you have time to think, your consciousness begins to fantasize and invent incredible scenarios. However, at the same time, you listen to the suggestions from your consciousness and realize what kind of situation it might lead you to. And sometimes we choose when suggestions are correct. Whereas in this case, consciousness was even silent. You know, it was like in that joke. Now, it says, it's definitely the end. So it was then. We drove towards the Kiev Reservoir, crossed the dam, and drove a little farther. We were silent. No one said a single word. There was no point for me to start a conversation either, since they had invited me. They would tell me. We drove just a little farther away from the dam, into a forest belt, to such a beautiful clearing, also not far from the road. In advance, my consciousness said, listen, since we came here and there's a road nearby, that's it. At least they won't use weapons. There's at least some chance. Consciousness is always looking for a chance. It is so funny to watch it, this consciousness. Well, the commander and two men came out. Already from outside the car, the commander asked me to get out. When I came out, two men were standing on the sides, and the commander was also at a distance. He pointed towards the center of the clearing. I moved to that center. The other two men stepped out, and consciousness said, there is at least some chance. They won't shoot. You can run. But then it immediately said, you're already old and fat. You've eaten too many dumplings to run away from young athletic men. You know, it both prompts and trolls you at the same time. It is interesting how consciousness works at such a moment. However, I noticed how they were standing. Their positioning was very correct. Not in a row, not in a line, no, but with a proper formation, you know, in such a small wedge, without hindering each other. And I remained in everyone's sight, no matter which way I would run. But consciousness said, they won't shoot. And at that moment, the two men who were on the sides of the commander, you know, as if by command, took out silencers and installed them on their guns. Consciousness said, well, this option won't work. They will shoot. And then I saw the driver who just threw a shovel a few meters away from me. And consciousness said, look, it's a shovel. Well, I was perfectly aware that it was a disservice in that case. Some people will say a shovel gives you at least some chance. It's a chance to create chaos and get injuries that will make you suffer for a long time. But it will end with the same thing anyway, which was undesirable either. Seeing that they were professionals, consciousness was comforting me. At least they won't miss the target. In that situation, it was quite acceptable, friends. Believe me, it's true. Well, an interesting thing happened next. The commander said, dig. As long as you dig, you will live. I said, I won't. You see, At that, I was always addressing him in an unceremonious manner. Those who understand do understand. It's a slight provocation of irritation, at least some chance. I told him, you see, you and your guys were paid to do a job. That is why I won't work. If you want to shoot, just shoot. If this should happen, so be it. You know, if God sends you a return ticket, it is not delivered by angels. God orders Satan, and he sends his slaves to hand you over this ticket. Therefore, it is pointless to refuse this ticket. It has already been handed over to you. This is normal, even though consciousness is against it. Consciousness is scared just like anyone else, and it is chaotically looking for a way out. Interestingly, the commander asked me, do you understand the difference between a shot in the head and in the stomach? I said, I surely do. He said, if you dig a pit, we will shoot you in the head. If you don't dig a pit, we will shoot you in the stomach and dig it ourselves. As long as we're digging it, you'll be suffering, and then we will bury you alive. To which I replied to him, it doesn't matter how you die, if you die. In this case, if I dig, it's like I would run away at the foot of a mountain while in the sniper's crosshairs. I would die anyway, but tired. As for pain, who said that you won't hit and won't miss, and that I won't feel pain? But at least I won't be tired. I tried to draw him into talking a little bit, but my words were somehow flying past his ears. And he said, it's your choice. I realized that the moment was approaching. I said, wait, I have a little request. Even Mujahideen fulfilled this request when our soldiers asked for it. I want the last cigarette. I said, look, guys, I saved you time. If I were digging, I would have been digging for a very long time. I would certainly prolong my life, and you would be forced to watch me, because you don't want to dig the pit yourselves, but you'll dig it much faster. Meanwhile, I'm only asking for one cigarette that I will smoke within 3 minutes. I said, I'm saving you time. Moreover, if you give me a cigarette, I'll tell you my favorite parable. You won't be bored. The commander just looked at one of his men who was standing a little further away. He took out a cigarette and started lighting it. Consciousness said, now is the time. He is also armed. And he's going to give you a cigarette, and this will be your chance. Well, and then a funny thing happened. He just threw me the cigarette. I finally realized that those in front of me were not children. There was no chance. I took the cigarette, told them a parable, and before I finished telling it, I noticed that the two who were standing a little farther away took half a step back and slightly turned away. But as for the commander and the two men beside him with weapons in their hands, not a muscle in their faces or bodies twitched. They were not touched at all by my stories and my efforts to make contact. However, the commander started thinking, and he asked me, how come you're not offering us a payoff? He said, people usually do that. They offer more. I answered, you see, even if I find the money to pay you, while you are the third one in the last 2 months, what will I pay to the fourth ones who will definitely come? Literally, in a second he said, aren't you afraid? I looked at him and said, let's switch places, and you will understand that every person's consciousness reacts according to which side of the counter they are on. And then I heard the words that gave me the right to tell you about this. He asked me, what did you actually do that priests ordered us to kill you? Of course, I understood who had ordered to kill me, and who basically was against Allat, and why. I answered him, it's because I tell the truth, because night doesn't like the sunrise, and darkness doesn't like the burning of a candle. The amazing thing was that this man nodded his head and said to one of his subordinates, "Give him the keys." The latter just threw me my car keys. They turned around and walked away. And this commander, he lingered, looked in my direction, and wanted to say something, but apparently he couldn't find the words. They got into the car and left. Why have I told you this? I've told you this because even the murderers who were sent to me are much more humane and decent than those who sent them. And the most interesting thing is that after taking the keys, I had to walk back to the Lavra. I came, it was already about... I was in no hurry. To be honest, several times I bummed cigarettes from passers-by before I got there. I came, it was already 2 o'clock in the morning, a little past 2, and there, who knows the Lavra, there's a security post with the Cossacks, with whom I've been friends for many years. There's a boom gate, you cannot just walk up to a car there, they have to let you in. Plus, there were surveillance cameras, at least a few of them for sure. As I approached the Cossacks, I said, "Excuse me, guys, but there was a car parked here. I left with the guys, with my acquaintances, and forgot some documents in their car. And when we parted, I didn't take my mobile phone. Could you, please, check the cameras to see who is standing here, to find out who they are, at least by the car number, so that I can get my things?" The Cossacks were surprised to see me. They said, "We also saw that your car remained here and wondered why you didn't leave. The lights in the clinic were out, nobody was there. We went to check, the car was still here, and we thought it had broken down." And the most interesting thing is that when I asked, I questioned them and even gave a hint that it was a white Volkswagen. They said, "No, we didn't see anyone. Maybe it wasn't our shift. Maybe other guys know." They promised to check it the next day and to let me know. And do you know what is remarkable? The cameras weren't working. They say it happens. And those Cossacks, who were on shift, saw nothing and no one. They let in and out that car with military men who turned out to be unnoticed by anyone, by no one at all. You know, such a 6 people, 5 of them were walking around near my car, got in the car together with me, yet nobody noticed them. That's the story. Well, there's nothing good about it, and basically, my life has been like that since my youth. By the will of fate, I have faced various similar manifestations since my early youth. And to be honest, back then I didn't think that I would live to adulthood and I would be able to start a family. It was somehow, unrealistic for me. Why? Because I learned that I could be a danger to my family. So did I need it? However, God arranged things in His own way, which perhaps was right. Otherwise, how could I have tasted this fruit? And without tasting it, how would I understand those who have a family, who have children and responsibility? Already having a family with small children, thanks to those very keepers, I had to leave my own house with small children, let's say, to take them away more than once. And we had to change houses. Yes, for other people, including relatives, the circumstances were, if you look at it from the outside, like in that orchestra, everything seemed to be clear. And the reasons that arose were understandable, but those were only the visible reasons. Yet, what was behind them? And who was behind them? In fact, perhaps this may even be a revelation for my family and friends right now. Maybe. Or maybe they actually guessed and saw it all, because they went through a lot. It's true. There were times when I was with small children in my arms, in places where, actually, far away from home, and really without a penny to buy a piece of bread for my children. I had no money, but I had friends. Those friends who were in need themselves, and they had families, but they shared their last with my family. At that time, my friends became an integral part of my true family. And that says a lot about how many good people there are in our world. Sometimes, we don't notice those who are around us, while sometimes there are people around us who are eager to stab us in the back at any moment. Also, my friends know another friend of mine, again, who was seduced by certain representatives whom he didn't even recognize, although he knew my life story, knew a lot about my childhood. And from the circle of my friends, he was preparing a group that was supposed to assassinate me. This happened far and wide. Some people might say that you can get used to anything, and even more so to this. No, friends, I'll put it as follows. Consciousness doesn't get used to things that threaten your life, and even more so, threaten your relatives and friends. While the actions of those fellows, not only in the field of actual terrorism, aimed at taking life or something else, actually affect those who are near me, especially publicly. A simple example. After all, when those extremists paid journalists, they pitted them against my family and friends, against my children. Journalists broke into their apartments to tell them that their father is the head of a pro-Putin sect, sort of the Russian world, and the like, which is a threat to all mankind. And they published details about my children, who works where and so on, slinging mud and whatnot on them. What is most interesting is that they told the scariest stories about me, about my super masculine abilities, that terrible things are happening in Allat. There are sexual orgies during which I, like a superhero, can satisfy a huge number of representatives of the opposite sex. I emphasize it to avoid confusion. Thank God, at least not the other way around. And the most interesting thing is that I'm doing it all with a cigarette in my mouth while constantly smoking. You know, I'm allegedly such a hero at my age, at the time when the majority of young people, despite even chemical stimulants, are unable to fulfill their marital duty. And this particular mindset regarding sex and everything else indicates that those materials were actually delivered or composed by those who poorly know the mentality of our people. Why? If this happened in another country, it could have had a very different kind of resonance. Let's look at Donald Trump, okay? America is in the middle of the election race, and his sexual scandals that had happened, God knows when, popped up again. All those main female characters in those scandals are old now, but it is still somehow affecting his ratings towards a decline. But that's their mentality, not ours. In our country, even when they tried to slander and defile me, this way in the eyes of my children's colleagues, so that the latter, according to the plans of those scums, would cause pressure on my children, and they would be offended and start hating me as a father, so that when I come home, my wife would hit me with a frying pan and drive me out of the house, so that I would have, sort of unacceptable and unbearable conditions in my life. That's what that sect wanted. And based on their expectations, I was supposed either to leave Allat and keep my family, or to leave the family and stay in Allat. But in any case, I would be psychologically depressed. In theory, that's exactly what was supposed to happen. But this is our nation. These are our people. These are the ones who know me well from the other side too. From the one those scums do not know. And our people possess true information. And even our mentality, I saw nothing but envy. All my acquaintances started asking me and wondering, does nicotine actually increase masculine power? As for my children's acquaintances, well, some people smiled, but basically everyone pretended it was no big deal. And no one was interested, in fact, taking into account what was really happening. Of course, there were several bastards who tried to email those videos to my children. By the way, the videos were released on mainstream channels more than once. Well, those were just bastards who incognito sent links to them. There were such fellows. But what did they want to achieve? To break me down. And simply to win by such vile and disgusting deeds. Tell me honestly, when you look repeatedly into the eyes of death, which that sect has organized, would you care about such trifles? I wouldn't. But, to be honest, I got into a situation like that of Grandpa Solomon in a joke. I'll tell it for those who don't know. There lived 3 friends. They were already at a respectable age, met on weekends in a park, talked, played chess, and recalled their youth. Once, Grandpa Solomon didn't come. The 2 friends said, "Probably he is sick." But when he didn't come the next 2 weekends in a row, they already thought he had died. To be honest, they decided that was it. Death had come after him, and they would already be the next. However, they were surprised when they saw him a month later. They started asking him questions. "Listen, Solomon, you must have been very ill and stayed in the hospital." He said, "No, why? I was in prison." His friends exclaimed, "In prison? But what did you do?" He said, "Oh, you won't believe it. In our house, to be more precise, in the apartment next to mine, there lives a young girl. Such a mischievous, silly chick. So she got pregnant. And her parents pressed on her, saying, 'You're so young, and you are pregnant. What happened? How?' Covering her friends, she said, 'You see, I was in the bathroom, taking a shower. The doorbell rang. I put a towel on myself, opened the door, and there was our neighbor saying, "Lend me some salt." I went to get the salt while he followed me. In the end, he raped me. This was immediately rumored. The entire house and the entire block found this out. The police came to me and told me what I had done and how. The entire house and the entire block already knew. I looked at the situation and said, "Yes, I'm guilty." And that's it. They put me in jail. Solomon's friends said, "Wait, they put you in jail for rape for a month?" No, not for rape, but for a false testimony against myself. This is funny, but it is life. In fact, many people who do not know my life envied me, and this very catharsis, the same catharsis that others before me performed hundreds of years ago in front of their friends. I think it makes you realize that you shouldn't envy me, and even more so, you shouldn't envy those who are close to me, my friends. They also get the same glory, the same shame, the same dangers, and the same fears, because consciousness is afraid. And what they, my loved ones, my friends, and my relatives have experienced, people should not experience. Ordinary people should not live like this, like those who live near me. People should live without fear. People should live in freedom. People should live without being afraid of shadows. Consciousness is the same for everyone. If you got scared, you'll be afraid of a shadow anyway. Even if you are in the light, consciousness is a tool of the darkness, and it is in the shadows anyway. It doesn't look at the light, but it notices every shadow, and that is tiring. So you shouldn't envy anybody. You should build your life. You should fill yourself with light and ignore even such trifles as I have told you about. Everything passes, friends, especially nowadays. We have nothing to lose because we have lost everything. We just don't know about it. Such is the situation. Yes. Consciousness hooks us, and there are some values for it. But the highest value, friends, is life. And the very highest value is life eternal. That's what we should aspire to. I've told you a little bit of history. Being aware that some have been impressed by it, while others have not. But it is true. It is true. And I have told you this truth only to explain why they hate Allatra, how and with what methods they fight all over the world against this organization, Allatra International Public Movement, which is no threat to anyone except those who are afraid of the light because they live in darkness. It poses no danger to either governments or agencies or anyone else, and in fact, by the order of those keepers, Allatra has been checked by all the agencies and special services so many times that it has become by far the most checked and verified organization. They were looking for money and are still looking for it. Let's just say that in Ukraine, they are looking for money from the opposing party, while the opposing party is looking for money from Ukraine. But there is nothing in Allatra. There is neither money nor property. Nothing but love for God, as Jesus Christ bequeathed. This is the way it should be. Once a wise man said, for Satan to leave religions, it's enough to remove the money. And he was right. They blame Allatra for everything they are guilty of. Why? Because a liar accuses honest people of lying. A murderer accuses people of murder. This is the way the world is arranged. This is the way their God dictates to them. But their God is Satan. As Jesus Christ said, they are Satan's children. Many will say, or they will think, in any case, consciousness will tell many people that I am now trying to say something bad and show that the church is to blame, at least the Orthodox Church, and that I am somehow treating them badly. No, my friends, I can't treat Christianity badly, especially the Orthodox Church. Why? Because I had many wonderful friends there. Vano, John, Father Anthony, they are the luminaries in this darkness of the world. How can I have a bad attitude to those who have done so much? In spite of everything, in spite of their internal church quarrels, that is their life, that is their choice. But they were wonderful people, and there are many such people. As of today, the book Allatra is very widespread, even among the Orthodox priests, even on Mount Athos. Many monks read it, but they are afraid to talk about this. Why? Because they know about that organization, which has penetrated all religions, which has penetrated like an arrow through the heart, all the countries of the world, practically all the power structures, which rules and has been ruling this world almost completely. But they have always been missing a little bit. The devil cannot have absolute power in this world, just because there is light in it, and he strives to extinguish this light by all means in order to become the true king of this world. So far, he is the prince. He controls the power. He endows everyone who serves him with opportunities and delights of this life, but he also takes away their lives. And those little things he gives them. He deprives them of the main thing, God's love. And those who truly love God, they feel and know this. And being afraid of this terrible organization of the keepers, they do not want to provoke their anger. So, ridiculous as it may seem, they read the book in secret. When I was working in the Lavra, those very monks from Mount Athos often came to see me. We often spent hours with them, talking about the truth. So how can I not love orthodoxy? Of course I love it. I love it because it still has the grains that Jesus Christ brought here. Because in this very orthodoxy, and in Christianity in general, there are many people who illuminate the darkness of this world with bright light. Yes, there is darkness everywhere, and these representatives are everywhere. But all this is temporary, and they are aware of this. That's why they raged at Allat from the very beginning, and they keep raging at it. And that's why my life is the way it is, from my early youth until today. They organized such terror and persecution of my family and children, pouring plenty of filth on me. There were sex scandals and whatnot. They immediately started saying that I called myself Imam Mahdi, Mashiach, the Comforter, Rigdin Japo, and the like. But, my friends, I've always been saying that I'm an ordinary man, just like you. And I have an ordinary body, just like you have. And if it is wounded, it bleeds just the same. And those who organized all those attacks were convinced of this more than once. And indeed, they have spoken and written that people say that I am Imam Mahdi. But tell me, friends, if I were Imam Mahdi, what would you see? You would see behind my back one united Ummah, loyal to its Prophet Muhammad, the best of people. A single Ummah, loving Allah. But tell me, what do you see behind my back right now? You see a white wall. Hence, I'm not Imam Mahdi. And this fact is ascertained. If I were the comforter, as people say, what would you see? You would now see behind my back all of Christianity, loving Jesus Christ, loving God, the Father, and the Holy Spirit. But what do you see? You see a white wall. Hence, I'm not the one whom Jesus Christ was talking about. And this fact is now ascertained. And if I were the Mashiach, you would definitely see Judaists behind my back, with the Torah in their hands. However, behind my back, there is a white wall. And if I were the leader of the mystical Shambhala Rigdin Japo, what would you see? Well, basically, what you now see. That's how the world is arranged. Our world that is full of evil, betrayal, and, a kind of hopelessness which they try to impose on us. But this is an illusion. We do have a way out, friends, if we unite in a single egregore, as it is said. And what is an egregore? It's a single goal. Then, as humanity, we will be able to do a lot. We still have time, and we have an opportunity to really change a lot, despite the resistance, even of our consciousness. But let's put it simply. What can we lose, friends, at the time when we have almost lost everything? Those scums understand this too, and it pisses them off, yet they continue to fight, hoping that their God will be able to control the climate Cerberus and will be able to stop it. However, the devil will not stop the Cerberus. The devil is darkness. It's an illusion, while the Cerberus, no matter how terrible this is, it is light. And this light can only be stopped by a brighter light, but not darkness. This world was built by all of us. We have no one to blame. The only question is, what to do? The eternal question, who is to blame and what to do? I will answer it simply, we are to blame. Because due to our silence and our fear, We begot this world the way it is. Jesus said, "Fear not," but we fear. Jesus said, "Fear not and speak," but we fear and keep silent. So who are we? That's why the world is like this. But everything comes to an end. Everything in this world has both a beginning and an end. Every story, no matter how long it is, ends someday. And the only question now is what will end? The power of dark forces over us, or our history? The history of all of us, whether this is funny or sad. It's for you to decide, friends. And the choice is up to us. Okay, friends, I am somehow talking a lot today. I thank those who organized this conference. You see, being impressed, I arrived at catharsis too. Indeed, the truth must sound. Then there is no room for lies. When there is an understanding of how this world is arranged, there is an understanding of what to do. When we don't know where we're going and what we're going there for, we simply destroy our own life. But when we have a goal and an idea, then we have something to invest inspiration in and to hope for. And as long as there is hope and we have a seedling in our hands, we must plant it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Igor Mikhailovich.
Thank you, friends. I'm sorry if I said something wrong. Peace be with you and God's love.